When I stared across the courtroom at my own daughter, my lawyer David whispered, "Your Honor, the prosecution calls one final witness." A hush fell over the room. My breath hitched. "It can't be," I murmured, my hands trembling. My daughter Clara's smug smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, cold dread. She gripped her husband's arm, her knuckles white, when she saw the familiar face in the doorway. Her perfect little scheme was about to come crashing down. Ethan, my son-in-law, froze, his pen slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the oak table. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "No," Clara mouthed, shaking her head frantically at her lawyer. "No, no, you can't let this happen." Her voice was a strangled gasp. The judge, a stern-looking man with weary eyes, peered over his glasses toward the entrance. Every eye in the room followed his gaze. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. I could hear the soft, deliberate footsteps approaching down the long hall. A shadow fell across the frosted glass of the courtroom door, the silhouette of a person I loved more than life itself. My throat closed up. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But as the door swung open, every lie I had endured, every document I had found, every tear I had cried in the dark for the past 2 years finally made sense. Clara shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection! She is not a credible witness!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. "This is a setup." Her lawyer tried to pull her back down, but she wrestled her arm away. Mark's face was ashen, like he'd just seen a spirit from the grave. And in a way, for them, maybe he had. David, my lawyer, stood calmly beside me, a bastion of strength in the swirling chaos. He gave me a brief, reassuring look that said, "It's all over now. Trust me." And I did. I had to. Because for 2 long years, I had been losing. 2 years of being systematically dismantled, erased, and treated like a ghost in my own life by the 2 people who should have protected me. But this nightmare, this whole heartbreaking story, didn't begin in this stuffy courtroom that smelled of old paper and despair. It didn't start with lawsuits and legal jargon. It started years ago, in my own sunny kitchen, with my daughter handing me a cup of chamomile tea while she was secretly planning to take everything I had ever worked for. It started with a loss so profound it shattered my world. It started the day my Arthur died. He passed away on a Thursday morning. 50 years of a beautiful marriage, gone in the blink of an eye. He died peacefully in his sleep, right there beside me. I woke up that morning, just like any other, and I reached for his hand, but his skin was cold. As cold as stone. As cold as the terrible finality of it all. I remember screaming his name, shaking him, begging him to wake up. But my Arthur was gone. His body was there, but the light, the warmth, the love had vanished, and he hadn't even given me a chance to say goodbye, to tell him one last time how much he meant to me. A massive heart attack, the doctor said. A quiet thief in the night. The days that followed were a blur of grief and confusion. A constant stream of people flowing through my house, their faces a mix of pity and awkwardness. The scent of lilies was overwhelming, too sweet, too funereal. Hugs from distant relatives, empty platitudes from neighbors. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He's in a better place now. Time heals all wounds." Lies. All of them. Just polite noises people make when they are faced with a grief too large to comprehend. Clara was there. I'll give her that. My daughter seemed to be my rock. She planned the entire funeral. She picked out the mahogany casket. She dealt with the funeral director. She stood by the door and greeted every guest. I felt like a spectator at my own tragedy, a ghost floating through rooms that were once filled with life. "Don't you worry about a thing, Mom," she'd say, her voice soft as she smoothed my hair. "I'll handle everything. Just let me take care of you." And I let her. I let her because I was hollowed out, a shell of the woman I used to be. I had no fight left in me. I thought that was what family was for, to hold each other up when one of us falls. Oh, how wrong I was. The funeral ended, the casseroles stopped coming, and the last of the visitors finally left. I was alone, utterly alone in a house that now felt like a mausoleum. Every corner held a memory of Arthur. The worn leather armchair in the living room where he read his history books. The kitchen where we'd dance to old records while making Sunday brunch. The garden we'd planted together, rosebush by rosebush, for decades. The entire house was a monument to a life that was over. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed. The emptiness beside me was a physical presence, a cold spot that radiated sorrow. I spent my nights on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling, waiting for a dawn I dreaded. The days were long and gray, blending into one another. I stopped caring. I stopped eating. I stopped showering. My heart kept beating, but I wasn't really living. Clara started visiting every other day. She would bring containers of food that I wouldn't eat. She would gently guide me to the shower. She would brush my hair as if I were a child, and I just let it happen. I was too tired to resist, too lost in my grief to care about anything. A month passed in this fog, a month of just existing. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Clara showed up with Mark. They rang the bell over and over until I finally dragged myself off the sofa to open the door. I was still in the same housecoat I'd been wearing for 3 days, my hair unkempt, my eyes vacant. "Oh, Mom," Clara said, her expression tightening with what I thought was concern. "You look terrible. You can't keep living like this." Mark stood behind her, his hands shoved in his pockets, his gaze sweeping over me with an intensity I found unsettling. "Eleanor, this grief is going to destroy you. This isn't healthy," he said, his voice smooth and persuasive. They walked in without waiting for an invitation, settling themselves on my sofa as if they owned the place. Clara's eyes darted around the room, and I saw a flicker of something I couldn't place then. It was calculating, sharp, but my mind was too clouded with sorrow to decipher it. "Mark and I have been talking," Clara began, taking my hands in hers. Her skin was cool. "We're worried about you. This house, it's just too big for one person. The maintenance, the bills, the sheer loneliness of it all. You can't manage this on your own." "Your father always took care of everything," I mumbled, which was true. Arthur had handled the finances, the repairs, the practicalities of life. I had handled the heart of our home. "Exactly," Mark chimed in, leaning forward. "And that's why we have an idea. A proposal." Clara squeezed my hands. "What if we moved in with you? The 3 of us, me, Mark, and Sophie. We could be a family again. You wouldn't be so alone. I could cook for you, take care of you, just like you always did for me." The thought sparked something inside me, a tiny flicker of warmth in the frozen landscape of my heart. The thought of not being alone anymore, of hearing my granddaughter Sophie's laughter echoing through the halls, of having someone to share a meal with. I don't know," I hesitated. "It's a big step." "Just think about it, Eleanor," Mark said, his smile a little too bright. "No pressure, just consider it." But I had already considered it. I was drowning, and they had thrown me what I thought was a lifeline. I was terrified of dying of a broken heart, all alone in that big, silent house. I trusted them. They were my family, my own flesh and blood. A week later, the moving truck arrived. "Just a few essentials," Clara had said, "so we don't crowd you." But the boxes kept coming. Their sofa, their dining table, Sophie's bedroom set, Mark's entire home office. "It's just for a little while, Mom," Clara promised. "Just until you're back on your feet." But it wasn't just for a little while. Within a month, they had completely redecorated the guest rooms. 2 months in, Mark had taken over Arthur's study, my husband's sanctuary, the place he went to think. And I didn't say a word. I told myself they were helping me. The changes were insidious, so gradual I barely noticed them happening until I was trapped. Mom, you really shouldn't go for a walk today. The air is damp. Mom, why don't you let me handle your bank accounts? All those numbers will just give you a headache. Mom, I don't think you should invite Betty over anymore. All she does is gossip. It was a cage built of concern, a prison disguised as protection. And I, like a fool, went along with it. I was a tired old woman, and I had lost the will to argue. Clara began screening my calls. Mom's resting right now, she would say in her sweetest voice. I'll have her call you back. But I never called back, because I never got the messages. Betty, my neighbor and friend for 30 years, stopped trying to visit. My bridge club stopped calling. My world slowly shrank until it contained only them. Clara, Mark, and Sophie, who seemed more withdrawn and quiet with each passing day. Are you all right, Grandma? She asked me one afternoon, her young face etched with worry. She was 15 then, on the cusp of becoming a young woman. I'm fine, sweetie, I lied, because at that point, I still didn't understand that I wasn't. I still thought this was their way of caring for a grieving widow. But Sophie looked at me with an old soul's wisdom, as if she could see the bars of the cage that I couldn't. Then Clara walked into the room, and Sophie immediately looked down at her feet and scurried away without another word. The months turned into a year. I became a guest in my own home. I woke up when they told me to, ate what they put in front of me, and watched whatever shows they chose on the television. The house didn't even smell like mine anymore. It smelled of Clara's cloying perfume and the strong, bitter coffee Mark drank all day. One night, I couldn't sleep. A familiar restlessness had settled deep in my bones. I went downstairs around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. The house was pitch black and silent, but as I passed the study, Arthur's study, I saw a thin sliver of light from under the door, and I heard voices, Clara and Mark. I tiptoed closer, my heart starting to pound. A primal instinct, a sense of danger that had been dormant for months, suddenly screamed at me to listen. The final papers are almost ready, Mark was saying in a low voice. Another 2 weeks, and we'll have full control. Are you positive this will work? Clara asked, her voice tight with nerves. The lawyer went over everything twice. With that power of attorney she signed last month, we can transfer the remaining assets. She won't suspect a thing. My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the wood of the door. What if she asks to see the documents? What if she starts asking questions? Clara pressed. Mark let out a dry, humorless laugh. She won't ask anything, Clara. She's completely checked out since your dad died. She's a ghost. She signs whatever we put in front of her. She's already done it 6 times. I still don't like it, Clara whispered. But there was no conviction in her voice, only the fear of being discovered. She's my mother. She's an old woman sitting on a house worth nearly $1 million and a stock portfolio that could set us up for life, Mark retorted coldly. And we are drowning in debt. My business is gone. The creditors are calling every day. This is our only option. There was a long, heavy pause. Fine, Clara said at last. But as soon as it's done, we have to find a place for her. I can't stand looking at her every day knowing what we did. A state-run facility, Mark added. Something affordable. We need that money to get clear and start over somewhere else. Maybe out west, a fresh start. I stumbled back from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. My legs felt like they were made of jelly. I crawled back up the stairs, clinging to the banister for support. I got to my room, locked the door, and sank onto my bed as my entire world imploded. My daughter, my baby girl, the child I had rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose teenage heartbreaks I had mended. That same person was systematically robbing me, planning to toss me aside like a piece of old furniture. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief that had weighed me down for so long didn't disappear, but it crystallized. It turned from a soft, aching sorrow into a hard, sharp diamond of pure rage. I would not cry. Crying was for victims. Crying meant surrender. And if there was one thing my Arthur taught me in 50 years, it was that when life knocks you down, you get up. You get up, and you get smarter. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open, replaying every interaction, every document Mark had slid in front of me with his charming smile. Just a formality, Eleanor, to help manage things. And I had signed, without reading, without questioning, trusting them completely. Stupid. So incredibly stupid. The next morning, I went down for breakfast like nothing had happened. Clara was at the stove, humming to herself as she made pancakes. She turned and gave me a bright smile. "Good morning, Mom? Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I lied, forcing a smile in return. The mask was in place. If I was going to beat them, I had to play their game. I had to be the fragile, senile old woman they thought I was. For the next week, I was the perfect, docile mother. I ate what she cooked. I watched her TV shows. I nodded and smiled. But the moment they were out of the house, I became a detective in a life-or-death case. I searched drawers. I went through the papers on Mark's desk. I used the old smartphone I'd kept hidden in my knitting bag to take pictures of everything. And I found it all. Every last piece of their betrayal. The deed to my house, transferred to their names 2 months prior, bearing my forged signature. The power of attorney documents granting them complete control over my finances. The stacks of credit card bills in my name, for cards I never applied for. Over $50,000 in debt. Lavish dinners, expensive clothes, a vacation to the Caribbean, all on my dime while they pretended to be my loving caretakers. And then I found the final, most chilling document. A petition, already drafted by their lawyer, to have me declared mentally incompetent and made a ward of the state, with them as my legal guardians. It was filled with fabricated evidence of my decline, citing instances where I was confused or forgetful. They were just waiting for the right moment to file it, to strip me of my last shred of autonomy. I sat on the floor of Arthur's study, surrounded by the evidence of their monstrous greed. And I finally allowed myself to weep. Not tears of sadness, but tears of cold, hard fury. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a broken old woman they could manipulate and discard. They thought they could erase 50 years of my life, of my husband's hard work, of the home we built together. They had made a very, very big mistake. I carefully put every paper back exactly where I found it, leaving no trace of my search. My plan began to form. I couldn't just walk out. If I left, they would immediately file the petition, sell the house, and vanish with the money. I would be left with nothing, and it would be my word against theirs. I had to be clever. I needed help. 2 days later, a Tuesday, Clara announced she had a lunch date with some friends. Mark had a business meeting across town. Sophie was at school. The house was mine. I grabbed my purse, the hidden phone with the pictures of the documents, and walked out the front door. I walked the 2 blocks to Betty's house, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. I rang the bell, and when she opened the door, her jaw dropped. "Eleanor! Good heavens! I thought— Clara said you were unwell, that you weren't seeing anyone." "Clara has been lying about a lot of things, Betty," I said, my voice steady. "I need your help. I need a lawyer." Betty ushered me inside without another word, her face a mask of concern. She sat me down at her kitchen table and made me a cup of tea, her hands shaking slightly as she poured the hot water. She just stared at me, as if I were a specter from another time. "What on earth is going on, Eleanor?" she finally asked, her voice soft. "I've been so worried. Every time I call, Clara says you're sleeping. Your eyes. You look like you've been through a war." "I have," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "And I'm about to start another one. They're robbing me, Betty. My own daughter and her husband are trying to take everything I have." Betty went pale. "What?" Oh no, Eleanor, there must be a misunderstanding. Clara loves you. No, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. I showed her the pictures, the deed, the power of attorney, the credit card statements, the petition to have me declared incompetent. Her eyes widened in horror as she swiped through the images. My God, she whispered. This is monstrous. This is criminal. It's my life, I said. And I need a good lawyer, Betty. Someone who can fight this before they succeed. Betty grabbed my hand, her grip firm. My nephew, David. He's a lawyer. He specializes in elder law, complex family cases. They say he's a bulldog in the courtroom. She reached for her phone. I'll call him this instant. No, I said quickly. Not from here. Not on your phone. If Clara finds out I was here, if she suspects for a second that I know, she and Mark will accelerate their plans. I have to get back before she returns. Betty looked at me, her expression a mixture of terror and awe. You're a stronger woman than I ever knew, Eleanor. I'm a woman with nothing left to lose, I replied, and it was the gospel truth. When they back you into a corner, you either crumble or you come out fighting. And I was done crumbling. Come back tomorrow, Betty said, her mind working quickly. 11 o'clock. Clara always has her yoga class then. David will be here. We'll figure this out. I nodded and stood up. At the door, Betty gave me a long, fierce hug. Be careful, she whispered. If they're capable of all this, there's no telling what else they might do. The walk back to my house felt 100 miles long. I kept my expression placid, my pace slow and measured. When I walked in, Clara was in the kitchen, unloading groceries. She looked up, startled. Mom, where have you been? I was starting to worry. Just a little walk around the block, I said, feigning exhaustion. I needed some fresh air. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before she masked it with concern. Mom, we've talked about this. You shouldn't go out alone. What if you fell? What if you got confused? I was only gone for 10 minutes. I lied smoothly. Clara came over and took my arm, her grip a little too tight. Well, let me know next time, okay? You had me scared. Liar. She wasn't scared for me. She was scared for her inheritance. I'm sorry, dear, I murmured, looking down at the floor, playing the part of the chastised child. It won't happen again. Clara's smile returned. It's okay. Come on, I bought that special yogurt you like. You need to eat. That night, I ate her yogurt and told her it was delicious. When I went upstairs, I sat in the dark and counted the minutes until morning. The next day felt endless. I listened to Clara's morning routine, the shower, the blow dryer, the click-clack of her heels on the hardwood floor. Mom, I'm off to yoga, she called from the entryway. Mark's in the study on a conference call. Don't disturb him. I'll be back around 1. Have a good class, dear, I called back. I gave it 10 minutes. Then, like a thief in my own home, I slipped out the back door and practically ran the 2 blocks to Betty's house. My chest ached, not from the exertion, but from the adrenaline and the fear. Betty opened the door before I even knocked. Quick, come in. Standing in her living room was a man in his late 30s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Mrs. Miller, I'm David Porter, he said. My aunt has told me the situation. I've seen the photos she sent. What you're facing is very serious. I sat on Betty's floral sofa while David sat opposite me, a legal pad on his knee. I need you to tell me everything, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. From the day your husband passed, don't leave out a single detail. For the next hour, the story poured out of me. The grief, the manipulation, the isolation, the conversation I overheard, the documents I found. David listened intently, taking pages of notes. When I was finished, he looked at me gravely. Mrs. Miller, what your daughter and her husband are doing is a classic case of elder financial abuse. It's a felony, but proving it can be tricky, especially when it's your own family. My hope faltered. So, there's nothing to be done? I didn't say that. He corrected me quickly. I said it's tricky, not impossible. But first things first. We need to get you out of that house. Now. Today. The longer you're under their roof, the more danger you're in. If they get a whiff of this, they'll file that competency petition immediately. They could try to coerce you into signing more documents. Frankly, I wouldn't put it past them to cause you physical harm. A chill went down my spine. Harm me? They're desperate, David said grimly. They've stolen a lot of money and they're in deep. You are the only thing standing between them and $1 million payday. We can't afford to be naive. You can stay here with me, Betty offered immediately. No, I said, shaking my head. That's the first place she'll look. I can't put you in the middle of this, Betty. David nodded in agreement. She's right. We need somewhere discreet. He thought for a moment. I have a small condo I keep for work, for when I have late trials. It's clean, it's secure, and no one knows about it. You can stay there while we prepare our case. How long will this take? I asked, the weight of it all pressing down on me. It depends, he said honestly. But we have a strong foundation. We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze your assets and block any sale of the house. We can file a lawsuit to have the fraudulent transfers overturned. But you need to be prepared, Eleanor. This is going to be a war. Your daughter is not going to go quietly. She will lie. She will manipulate. She will paint you as a confused, ungrateful old woman. You will have to face her in court and not back down. I looked at him, the fire of my anger burning away the last vestiges of fear. I'm ready, I said. And I was. The heartbroken mother was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to fight for her life. Good, David said with a firm nod. Then let's begin. Go home. Pack a small suitcase. Only what you absolutely need, medications, documents, a few changes of clothes, nothing that would make them suspicious. The next time they both leave the house, you leave too. And you don't go back. You call me and we file the lawsuit that same day. I went back home that afternoon. Clara was there, cheerful and oblivious. I bought you that nice bread from the bakery, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Thank you, dear, I replied, my own smile just as false. Two liars in a kitchen, a battlefield of unspoken truths between us. That evening, I packed a small overnight bag and hid it in the back of my closet. I gathered my marriage certificate, my birth certificate, the original deed to the house from when Arthur and I bought it in 1972, a few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, and a small photo of Arthur. And then I waited. 3 days later, my chance came. Clara announced she was going to a day spa with a friend, a gift from Mark. Mark himself had a golf game that would take up the entire afternoon. Sophie was at a weekend debate tournament. The moment Clara's car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. I grabbed my bag, my purse, and I walked downstairs. My hands were shaking, but my steps were firm. I used the landline to call a taxi. 5 minutes, the dispatcher said. It was the longest 5 minutes of my life. I stood by the living room window, peeking through the curtains, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, the yellow cab pulled up to the curb. I took one last look around my home, the photos on the mantel, the worn spot on the carpet where Arthur's chair used to be, the sunlight streaming through the windows. I'll be back, I whispered to the empty house. And then I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The taxi took me to an address David had given me, a nondescript apartment building in a part of town I barely knew. David was waiting for me outside with a key. "Welcome to your command center," he said with a small smile. "It's not the Ritz, but it's safe." The apartment was small and sparse. A living room, a tiny kitchenette, a clean bathroom, but the door had a deadbolt, and for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. "Get some rest, Eleanor," David said, handing me the key. "Tomorrow, the war begins." That night, I slept in a strange bed, in a strange room. But I slept soundly, without the suffocating weight of fear and betrayal pressing down on me. The next morning, my phone, the one Clara knew about, was bombarded with messages. 22 missed calls from Clara, a flood of frantic texts. "Mom, where are you? I'm so worried. Please just call me and let me know you're safe. Mom, I'm calling the police." It was all a performance, but there was one message that was different. It was from Sophie. A single line. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom and Dad are going crazy. I'm scared." I replied to her and only her. "I am safe, my darling. Do not worry." David arrived at 9 with a briefcase and 2 cups of coffee. "Clara filed a missing persons report last night," he said without preamble. "The police visited Betty, who played her part beautifully, said she hadn't seen you in months." "What happens now?" I asked, a knot of panic tightening in my stomach. "Now we fight back," he said, opening his briefcase. "You're an adult woman. You're allowed to go wherever you want. But their panic tells us one thing. They're scared. And scared people make mistakes." He slid a thick stack of papers across the table. "Today, we filed our lawsuit. We're petitioning the court to nullify the property transfer. We're freezing all your accounts. We're suing for fraud and financial damages, and we're filing for a restraining order." "A restraining order? Against my own daughter?" The words tasted like ash in my mouth. David's gaze was unwavering. "Eleanor, your daughter was actively planning to have you declared incompetent and locked away. She is no longer just your daughter in this context. She's the defendant, and we have to treat her as such." I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, but I signed each page. Every signature felt like a final goodbye to the daughter I thought I had. A bridge burning in my past. There was no going back. The lawsuit was served that afternoon. David told me a process server went to the house. Clara answered the door, her face lighting up, probably thinking it was news about me. Instead, she was handed a summons to appear in court. David said the server told him she screamed. A long, piercing shriek that brought the neighbors running out of their houses. She started yelling that I was a senile, ungrateful woman, that they had given up their lives to care for me, that I had been brainwashed. Every word was a dagger. But the pain no longer weakened me. It forged me into something stronger. 2 days later, their official response came. Their lawyer countersued, claiming I was suffering from dementia, that I had willingly signed everything over to them for my own protection, and that my sudden disappearance was proof of my unstable mental state. "This is exactly what we expected," David said. "Now the real battle begins." The next few weeks were a blur of legal preparations. I lived like a recluse in that small apartment. David came by daily with updates. Clara had hired a high-powered, expensive lawyer, a man notorious for his ruthless courtroom tactics. They submitted their own medical reports from a doctor who had never met me, claiming I showed clear signs of cognitive decay. They had even gotten statements from a few neighbors I barely knew, saying I'd seemed confused recently. "They're building a narrative," David explained, "but we have the truth." He had me undergo a rigorous, independent psychological evaluation. I spent 4 hours with a neuropsychologist, a kind but thorough woman who put me through a battery of tests. "Mrs. Miller," she told me at the end, "you have the memory and cognitive function of a woman 20 years younger. There is absolutely no clinical evidence of dementia." Her report became our cornerstone, but Clara didn't stop there. She took her campaign public. She started a social media page, posting old, unflattering photos of me, photos where I looked tired or sad. She wrote long, emotional posts about her missing, vulnerable mother, who had been abducted by predators seeking to steal her money. The public ate it up. The comments were a torrent of sympathy for her. "What a devoted daughter, praying for your mother's safe return. Elderly people are so easily manipulated." David told me not to look, but I couldn't help it. Each comment felt like a tiny betrayal from a world that couldn't see the truth. Then, One rainy afternoon, about a month after I had left, David showed up at the apartment with an unreadable expression on his face. "We just had a development," he said, sitting down across from me. "A very interesting one. I just got off the phone with someone, with Sophie." My heart leaped into my throat. "My granddaughter? Is she all right?" "She's fine," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Better than fine. She wants to help. She says she has proof." "Proof? What kind of proof?" David took out his phone. "She says she's been recording them, for months. Conversations between Clara and Mark where they talk about everything. She's been doing it in secret because she knew something was wrong." I stared at him, unable to process his words. "Sophie did that? But why?" "Because she loves you," David said simply. "And because she's a very brave, very smart young woman who couldn't stand by and watch what they were doing to you." That night, he sent me the audio files. I sat in the dark, listening to my daughter's voice, my son-in-law's voice as they plotted my ruin. They talked about the value of the house, about the stock portfolio, about which nursing home would be the cheapest. And then, I heard Sophie's small voice. In one recording, she confronted them. "What's going to happen to Grandma?" she asked. "Your grandmother will be taken care of," Clara's voice replied, dripping with false sincerity. "She'll be in a wonderful place." "I don't want her to go anywhere," Sophie's voice trembled. "She belongs here." "You're old enough to understand that sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions for the good of the family." Mark's voice cut in, cold and dismissive. I listened to the recordings and wept. I wept for my brave granddaughter, who had risked so much to uncover the truth. I wept for the girl who had been forced to choose between her parents and her conscience. "This is it," David told me the next day. "This is the smoking gun. With these recordings, we can prove intent, premeditation. This isn't just a civil matter anymore, Eleanor. This is a criminal conspiracy." "Can Sophie testify?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. David nodded. "She insists on it. But you know what that will mean, don't you? She'll be testifying against her own mother and father. She'll be blowing her family apart." "I can't ask her to do that," I sobbed. "It's too much for a child to bear." "You're not asking," David said gently. "She's offering. She told me she's seen them for who they really are, and she can't live with the lies anymore." A few days later, David arranged a secret meeting, a small, out-of-the-way diner across town. I got there first, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my cup of coffee. Then I saw her walk in, my Sophie. She looked older, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there before. She scanned the diner, and when her eyes found mine, she froze. She walked toward my booth slowly, almost hesitantly. "Grandma?" she whispered, and then her composure shattered. She slid into the seat across from me and buried her face in her hands, her small body racked with sobs. I moved to her side of the booth and wrapped my arms around her. She felt so fragile. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm right here." "I was so scared," she cried into my shoulder. I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm okay," I soothed, stroking her hair. "I'm okay because of you, my brave girl." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I should have said something sooner. I heard them talking, but I was afraid. Afraid they'd get mad at me, afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was such a coward." "You are the furthest thing from a coward I have ever known," I said fiercely, taking her face in my hands. "You did what was right, even when it was scary. That's the definition of courage." She took a shaky breath and pulled out a small, cheap-looking smartphone. "I have more recordings. I've been recording them for almost a year." "Oh, Sophie, why? How did this start?" Her eyes, so much like mine, filled with a sad wisdom. "Because I saw you crying one night, a long time ago. I came downstairs, and your bedroom door was open just a crack. You were just sitting on the edge of your bed, crying in the dark, not making a sound. and I knew something was terribly wrong. You never cried, not even after Grandpa Arthur died. You were always so strong. Her voice caught in her throat. After that, I started to really watch them. I saw how Mom spoke to you when she thought I wasn't listening. I saw how they took away your phone, your friends. And then one night, I heard them in the study, talking about how it was only a matter of time before they had everything. And I finally understood. So I started recording. Weren't you terrified they'd catch you? I asked, my heart aching for her. Every single day, she admitted, but I couldn't let them do that to you. You were always there for me. When Mom and Dad were fighting, when I was having a hard time at school. You were my person. I wasn't going to let them take you away and leave you with nothing. I hugged her again, overcome with a love so fierce it felt like it could power the world. Do they know you're here? She shook her head. I told them I was at the library, but Mom is so paranoid now. She checks my phone every night. That's why I bought this one with my own money. It's where I keep all the files. David arrived a few minutes later and sat down with us. Sophie handed him the phone. He put in a pair of earbuds and began to listen, his expression shifting from concentration to shock, and finally, to a cold, contained anger. This is dynamite, he said, finally looking up. Absolute dynamite. We can bury them with this. He looked at Sophie, his expression serious. But you understand, if we use this, if you testify, your life will never be the same. Your parents will never forgive you. Sophie didn't even hesitate. I don't want their forgiveness. I want my grandma back. You're a minor, David pointed out. Legally, you're in their custody. If we put you on the stand, we need a plan to protect you. She can live with me, I said instantly. When I get my house back, she's coming to live with me. David nodded. We'll file for a change of custody, citing an abusive and harmful home environment. With this evidence, no judge in their right mind would make her stay with them. For the next hour, we laid out our strategy. David prepped Sophie for what was to come. Their lawyer will be vicious, he warned her. He'll try to paint you as a bitter, rebellious teenager looking for revenge. He'll say you doctored the recordings. He will attack your character. Let him try, Sophie said, a hard edge to her voice that I had never heard before. The recordings don't lie. Their own voices will convict them. When we left the diner, Sophie hugged me tight. I love you, Grandma. I love you more, my brave girl, I whispered back, watching her walk away, a young girl carrying the weight of a broken family on her shoulders. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were agony. David worked tirelessly, preparing the case. Betty would testify about my isolation. The neuropsychologist would testify about my mental fitness. A forensic accountant David hired had uncovered the full extent of the financial damage, nearly $250,000 stolen or funneled into Mark's failing business ventures. How could I have been so blind? I lamented one day, looking at the spreadsheet of my stolen life. Because you loved them, David said gently, and they weaponized that love against you. Meanwhile, Clara's media campaign reached a fever pitch. She gave an interview to a local news station, crying fake tears for the camera. My mother is the victim of a terrible manipulation, she wept. All I want is for her to come home safely. She was a masterful performer. She received donations, messages of support from strangers who believed her lies. She was using my own suffering to build a wall of sympathy around herself. But we had a secret weapon. We had the truth. And its name was Sophie. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in September, 3 months after I had fled my home. The night before, I didn't sleep. I just lay in the dark, thinking about the daughter who had betrayed me and the granddaughter who was about to save me. Ready? David asked when he picked me up the next morning. No, I said honestly, but I'm going to do it anyway. The courthouse was an imposing granite building that felt cold and unwelcoming. And there they were, standing on the front steps, Clara and Mark, with their shark of a lawyer. Clara was dressed in a conservative navy blue dress, the very picture of a respectable, worried daughter. Our eyes met across the courtyard. For a fleeting instant, I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes, of fear. But it was gone in a second, replaced by a cold, defiant glare. She lifted her chin and looked at me as if I were something she had scraped off her shoe. Mark just stared past me, as if I didn't exist. "Don't look at them," David murmured. "They're irrelevant." We went inside and found the assigned courtroom. It was small and claustrophobic. We sat at the plaintiff's table on the left. A few moments later, Clara, Mark, and their lawyer sat at the table on the right. Clara stared straight ahead, refusing to look at me. The bailiff called out, "All rise," and the judge entered. He was an older man with a no-nonsense expression. He sat, and we sat. "Case number 8745, the clerk read. Miller versus Miller and Vance. Petition for annulment of property transfer, recovery of assets, and damages." The judge looked over his papers. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if this case has sufficient merit to proceed to trial. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may begin." David stood and, in a clear, strong voice, laid out the entire story. The grief, the vulnerability, the slow, methodical takeover. "Your Honor," he concluded, "my client, Mrs. Eleanor Miller, a 72-year-old widow, was systematically defrauded by her own child and son-in-law, who abused her trust during the most vulnerable time of her life." Then it was their lawyer's turn. Mr. Harrison. His voice was smooth and paternal. "Your Honor, this is a tragic family misunderstanding, not a crime. My client, Mrs. Clara Vance, was simply trying to manage the affairs of her mother, Mrs. Miller, who, sadly, is suffering from significant cognitive decline. All transactions were authorized. All signatures are legitimate. Mrs. Miller is now being manipulated by outside parties with their own financial motivations." My hands clenched into fists under the table. The audacity of his lies was breathtaking. "Do you have any hard evidence to support these very serious allegations?" the judge asked David. "We do, Your Honor," David said calmly. "We have the independent psychological evaluation confirming my client's full mental competency. We have the forensic accounting report detailing the financial irregularities. And," he paused, letting the silence hang in the air, "we have audio recordings." The effect was instantaneous. Clara went rigid. Mark, who had been feigning boredom, snapped his head up. Harrison's smug expression faltered for the first time. "Audio recordings," David repeated, "of the defendants in their own voices, explicitly planning to defraud my client, transfer her assets, sell her home, and place her in a state-run facility." "Objection!" Harrison boomed. "Those recordings, if they even exist, were obtained illegally." "Not when they were obtained by a minor resident of the home who had a reasonable fear for the safety and well-being of her grandmother," David countered smoothly. "Especially when that minor is prepared to testify." Clara gasped, a choked, strangled sound. "What minor? What are you talking about?" The judge slammed his gavel. "Mrs. Vance, you will be silent or I will have you removed." Clara sank back into her chair, her face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. The judge looked at David. "Who is the source of these recordings?" "My client's granddaughter," David said, his voice ringing through the silent room. "The defendant's own daughter, Sophie Vance." Mr. Harrison shot to his feet. "This is a preposterous fabrication. They are manipulating a teenager into attacking her own parents." "Miss Vance is no longer a minor," David corrected him coolly. "She turned 18 3 weeks ago, and her recordings are admissible under this state's one-party consent law, particularly given the reasonable suspicion of ongoing criminal activity." The judge leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He studied the faces at each table for a long moment. "I want to hear these recordings," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "And I want to hear from this young woman. We will convene a full hearing in 2 weeks' time. In the interim," he continued, his gaze hardening as he looked at Clara and Mark, "I am issuing a temporary injunction. All assets, bank accounts, and properties related to this case are hereby frozen. There will be no transfers, no sales, no withdrawals until this court has ruled." He banged the gavel, and the sound cracked through the tension like a whip. "That house is legally ours," Clara shrieked, jumping to her feet again. "I have the deed." The judge fixed her with an icy stare. "Mrs. Vance, a word of advice. If you or your husband make any attempt to contact Miss Sophie Vance, if you text her, call her, or approach her in any way, I will not hesitate to charge you with witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Do I make myself clear?" Clara's mouth snapped shut. She gave a jerky, resentful nod. We filed out of the courtroom. In the crowded hallway, Clara lunged toward me, her face contorted with rage. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice a low, vicious snarl. "How could you poison my own daughter's mind against me?" I pulled my arm from her grasp, my own voice surprisingly calm and steady. "I didn't do anything, Clara. Sophie is a good person. She made a choice between right and wrong. It's a shame you can't say the same." "You venomous old snake," she spat. "We took care of you. We gave up our lives for you." "You gave up my life for you," I corrected her quietly. "You tried to steal my home, my money, and my dignity. You almost succeeded. The key word is almost." Mark stepped up beside her, his face dark with menace. "You're going to regret this, Eleanor. When this is over, you'll have nothing. No house, no money, and certainly no family." David moved between us, a solid, protective presence. "Mr. Vance, I suggest you and your wife step away from my client immediately." Harrison hurried over and pulled them back. "Not another word from either of you," he ordered through clenched teeth. I watched them walk away, Clara turning once to shoot me a look of such pure hatred it made me shiver. But I held her gaze. The frightened, grieving woman she had manipulated was gone for good. "You were brilliant," David said as we walked toward the exit. "You stayed completely calm. That was perfect." "Do we actually have a chance to win?" I asked, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving me trembling. "Eleanor," he said, stopping to look at me. "With Sophie's testimony, her recordings, and all the financial evidence, it's not a chance. It's a certainty." That night, after David had arranged everything with social services, Sophie came to stay with me in the little apartment. The judge had issued a temporary emergency custody order, removing her from her parents' home for her own safety. "You cannot return to that house," the judge had told her sternly. "Not until this matter is resolved." Clara had wailed in the courtroom, "You can't take my daughter from me." To which the judge had replied, "Madam, she is an 18-year-old adult. She can live wherever she chooses, and it seems she has chosen not to live with you." That evening, Sophie called me from the apartment's small bedroom, her voice a hushed whisper. "Mom completely lost it when they got home from court," she said. "She was screaming, throwing things. She smashed a bunch of plates. Dad tried to calm her down, but she just screamed at him too. She said you'd ruined their lives and that you were going to pay." "Oh, Sophie," I whispered, my heart breaking for her. "Are you sure you can do this? No one would blame you if you changed your mind." "No," she said, and her voice was suddenly firm, filled with a resolve that sounded so much older than her years. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to stand up there and tell the truth. I don't care if they hate me for it. It's the right thing to do." "I love you, my dear girl." "I love you too, Grandma. We're going to get through this. I promise." The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I felt like I was holding my breath the entire time. David worked around the clock, preparing our case, and more importantly, preparing Sophie. He met with her every day, going over what she could expect, role-playing the cross-examination. Harrison is going to be merciless, he warned me one evening. His entire strategy will be to discredit Sophie. He'll paint her as a vindictive, lying teenager who hates her parents and concocted this whole scheme for attention or money. What if the judge believes him? I asked, my stomach in knots. He won't, David said with confidence. Because Sophie has something Harrison's clients don't, the truth. And when the truth is backed up by hours of audio recordings, it's pretty hard to deny. The morning of the full trial arrived, dawning gray and overcast, the sky mirroring the anxiety in my soul. I'd barely slept, just stared at the ceiling of the strange little apartment, my mind racing. David picked me up at 7. Sophie is ready, he told me. A court officer is escorting her from a different location. We can't risk Clara and Mark trying to intercept her on the way. How is she? She's scared, he admitted. But she's resolute. That young woman has more courage in her little finger than her parents have in their entire bodies. We arrived at the courthouse to a small circus. Apparently, the story of the grandmother versus the greedy daughter and the surprise teenage witness had been picked up by local news blogs. There were more people, more reporters milling about. Clara had brought her own cheering section, friends she had duped with her sob story, who glared at me with contempt as I walked past. We entered the main courtroom this time. It was much larger, with high ceilings, dark wood paneling, and tall windows that looked out onto the gray sky. It felt more formal, more intimidating. Clara, Mark, and Harrison were already at their table. Clara was wearing a soft gray dress and a single strand of pearls. She looked elegant and fragile, the perfect victim. Mark looked grim, and Harrison was all business, shuffling through a mountain of papers. I sat down, and David began arranging his own files. The large clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. At precisely 9 o'clock, the bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." The judge entered, the same one from the hearing, his face impassive. He sat and gestured for us to be seated. "Case number 8745, the clerk announced. Continuation of hearing, Miller versus Miller and Vance. The judge put on his glasses. Today, this court will hear the testimony of the witness, Miss Sophie Vance, and review all additional evidence presented by both parties. Counsel for the plaintiff, you may call your first witness." David stood up. The plaintiff calls Miss Sophie Vance to the stand. A side door opened, and my granddaughter walked in. She looked so small in that vast room, dressed simply in dark pants and a white blouse, her hair pulled back neatly. She walked with her head held high, her steps measured and sure. She didn't look at her parents. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the witness stand. The clerk administered the oath. Sophie placed her hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Clara let out a loud, theatrical sob. "My baby," she whimpered, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "What have they done to you?" Harrison placed a calming hand on her arm, whispering in her ear. She quieted down, but she kept dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. It was a masterful performance. David approached the witness stand. "Miss Vance, would you please state your full name for the record?" "Sophie Isabel Vance." "And what is your relationship to the plaintiff, Mrs. Eleanor Miller, and the defendants, Mrs. Clara Vance and Mr. Mark Vance?" "Eleanor Miller is my grandmother. Clara and Mark Vance are my parents." "And where have you been living for the past 2 years?" "At my grandmother's house, 214 Chestnut Lane." "Miss Vance, why are you here today?" Sophie took a deep breath and finally looked toward her parents. Clara stared back, her eyes pleading and manipulative. Mark wouldn't meet her gaze. "I'm here," Sophie said, turning back to the judge, "because my parents were stealing from my grandmother, and I couldn't let it happen anymore. Could you please tell the court what you observed?" "It started after my grandfather died," Sophie began. My parents and I moved in to help, but they started taking over. They told my grandma she couldn't see her friends. They took away her car keys. They took control of her mail and her money. I saw her getting sadder and smaller every day. She was like a ghost in her own house. And did you ever hear anything that concerned you? Yes. One night, about a year ago, I came downstairs and heard them talking in the study. They were talking about how they had gotten her to sign over the house. They were laughing about it. They said she was so out of it, she'd sign anything. They talked about selling everything and putting her in a cheap home so they could use the money to move away. What did you do after you heard this? I started recording them, she said simply. With your phone? Yes. Every time I heard them talking about my grandma, about her money, about the house, I would turn on the voice recorder on my phone and leave it in the room. David turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to play excerpts from these recordings for the court. Objection! Harrison was on his feet. Illegal recordings. Invasion of privacy. The judge waved a dismissive hand. We've been over this, Mr. Harrison. Your objection was noted at the preliminary hearing, and it is overruled now. Proceed, Mr. Porter. David connected a small device to the court's sound system. A moment later, Mark's voice, clear and unmistakable, filled the courtroom. It's almost a done deal. Another month, maybe 2, and we can list the house. The old lady has no idea. Then Clara's voice. What if she talks to a lawyer? What if Betty puts ideas in her head? Mark's voice again, this time with a dismissive laugh. Betty? We've handled Betty. As for a lawyer, don't worry. We have the competency petition ready to go. The minute she makes a fuss, we file it. Dr. Evans will testify she has advanced dementia. Any judge will grant us full guardianship. Then it's game over. A heavy, sickening silence fell over the courtroom. Even the reporters in the back were completely still. The recording continued. Clara's voice. How much do you really think we can get for the house? Mark's voice. In this market, at least $1 million, maybe 1.2. We sell it, pay off our debts. We walk away with enough to start a whole new life. Clara's voice. And her? The home? Mark's voice. The state-run place in Oak Ridge is about $2,000 a month. Her pension and Social Security will just about cover it. She'll be fine. It's not our problem after that. David stopped the recording. Clara was as white as a sheet, staring at her daughter with a look of utter betrayal. Mark had his face in his hands. Harrison was scribbling furiously on his legal pad, his confident demeanor gone. Miss Vance, David continued gently, why did you decide to come forward with these recordings? Sophie finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears that she refused to let fall. Because my grandmother is the kindest person I've ever known. She didn't deserve this. She took care of me my whole life. I couldn't stand by and watch my parents destroy her. Were you aware of the potential consequences to your family? Yes, Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. I knew. But this isn't a family anymore. Not a real one. No further questions, Your Honor, David said, returning to our table. Harrison stood up slowly and walked toward the stand, a predatory smile fixed on his face. Miss Vance, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You were 16 when you started making these secret recordings, is that correct? Yes. A teenager, and teenagers can be very dramatic, can't they? They can get very angry with their parents when they don't get their way. I wasn't angry, Sophie said calmly. I was scared for my grandmother. Weren't you, in fact, angry that your parents were trying to instill some discipline? Grounding you, taking away your phone privileges when you broke the rules? They punished me sometimes, like any parents. And you resented them for it. Isn't it true that you concocted this whole story, perhaps even manipulated these recordings to get back at them, to hurt them? Objection, David called out. Counsel is badgering the witness. Withdrawn, Harrison said smoothly. Miss Vance, Isn't it true that your grandmother frequently gave you money? Bought you expensive gifts? She gave me birthday and Christmas presents, yes. And isn't it true that those gifts stopped once your parents began prudently managing her finances? And that made you angry? No, Sophie said, her voice rising slightly. The gifts didn't matter. They were stopping me from even seeing her alone. I didn't want her money. I wanted her to be safe. Harrison changed his angle. These recordings, how do we know you didn't edit them, cut and paste words to create a narrative that suited your purpose? You can have a forensic expert analyze the original files on the phone, Sophie said, unflustered. They have digital timestamps. They haven't been altered. Harrison leaned in closer. Did your grandmother promise you anything in return for your testimony today? Did she offer you money? A car? Did she promise that you could live with her in that big house, rent-free? Sophie looked him dead in the eye. I asked to live with her because I would rather be homeless than live under the same roof as two people who would betray their own mother for money. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, seemingly stunned by her ferocity. He seemed to realize he had lost. No further questions, he muttered, turning and walking back to his table with a look of defeat. You may step down, Miss Vance, the judge said, his voice softer than before. Sophie walked back to our table and sat beside me. I reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it. It was cold as ice, but she had done it. She had told the truth. The rest of the day was a methodical demolition of Clara and Mark's case. David called the neuropsychologist, who testified to my complete mental clarity. He called the forensic accountant, who presented charts and graphs detailing the theft of $247,000 from my accounts. He called Betty, who told the story of my isolation, of how Clara had repeatedly told her I was too ill for visitors. Harrison's attempts to cross-examine them were weak and ineffective. When it was his turn, his case fell apart completely. He called the doctor who had provided the fraudulent dementia diagnosis. On cross-examination, David forced the man to admit he had never once met me, that his entire report was based on hearsay provided by Clara and Mark. The doctor was so thoroughly discredited that the judge announced he would be referring him to the state medical board for investigation. At 4 o'clock, after a long and grueling day, the judge called a recess. This court will resume at 9 a.m. Tomorrow, he announced, looking down at the piles of evidence. I intend to spend the evening reviewing this testimony and listening to these recordings in their entirety. We left the courthouse feeling drained but hopeful. As we walked out, I saw Clara staring at Sophie with a look of such venomous hatred that it chilled me to the bone. But Sophie didn't flinch. She just stared back, her expression clear and unwavering. That night, in our little apartment, we ate a quiet dinner, two survivors on the eve of their final battle. Do you think we'll win? Sophie asked, pushing her food around her plate. I think the truth will win, I said. And today, you gave it a voice. She had received dozens of text messages from her mother throughout the day, vicious, pleading, manipulative messages. You have destroyed this family. You are a horrible, ungrateful child. I will never forgive you for this. I'm sorry, I whispered, my heart aching for the pain she was enduring. Don't be, Sophie said, looking up at me. She made her choices. I just made mine. I reached across the table and held her hand. This child, this incredible young woman, had lost her parents to save her grandmother. The next morning, we returned to a packed courtroom. The story had exploded overnight. The judge entered, looking grim. He sat down and surveyed the room over his glasses. The silence was absolute. I have reviewed all the evidence presented in this case, he began, his voice grave. I have listened to the financial testimony, the psychological evaluations, and I have spent the better part of the night listening to the 12 hours of audio recordings provided by Miss Sophie Vance. He paused, and I felt like my heart was going to beat its way out of my chest. The recordings are authentic, and their content is deeply disturbing. They paint a clear and calculated picture of conspiracy, fraud, and profound elder abuse. It is clear to this court that Mr. and Mrs. Vance conspired to systematically defraud Mrs. Miller of her entire estate. Clara let out a small, strangled whimper. Mark just stared at the table, his face a grim mask. The psychological evaluation of Mrs. Miller confirms she is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her affairs. The evaluation presented by the defendants was, frankly, a work of fiction, and the doctor who signed it will be held accountable. The judge then looked directly at Clara and Mark, his eyes blazing with cold anger. What you have done to your own mother, to your own child's grandmother, is not just immoral. It is criminal. You preyed upon her grief and vulnerability. You abused her trust. You plotted to leave her penniless in a state-run institution. It is among the most despicable cases of familial betrayal I have ever presided over. Your Honor, Harrison began weakly. My clients. Silence, the judge thundered, cutting him off. I have heard quite enough from your clients, Mr. Harrison, primarily from their own recorded conversations. Harrison sat down heavily. Therefore, the judge continued, this court rules as follows. First, the judge declared, his voice booming in the silent courtroom, all property and asset transfers made from Mrs. Eleanor Miller to the defendants within the last 3 years are hereby declared null and void. The deed to the property at 214 Chestnut Lane is to be immediately restored to Mrs. Miller's name alone. I gasped, a sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaping my lips. I felt Sophie's hand tighten on mine. David gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. Second, the judge continued, full financial restitution is ordered. Mr. and Mrs. Vance will have 30 days to repay the $247,000 they misappropriated from Mrs. Miller. Failure to do so will result in the immediate seizure and liquidation of any and all of their personal assets. Mark let out a groan and slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. Clara was now openly sobbing, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. Third, the defendants are ordered to vacate the property at 214 Chestnut Lane within 72 hours. They may remove only their personal clothing and effects. Any furniture, art, or other items purchased with Mrs. Miller's funds are to remain. But where will we go? Clara wailed, her voice shrill. We have nothing, no money. You should have considered that, the judge said, his voice devoid of any sympathy, before you decided to embezzle your own mother's life savings. Fourth, he went on, a permanent restraining order is hereby issued. Mr. and Mrs. Vance are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Miller or Miss Vance. They are not to contact them by any means, not by phone, not by mail, not by a third party. Any violation will result in their immediate arrest. The gavel hit the wood, the sound echoing the finality of it all. And finally, the judge said, looking at them with utter disdain, I am referring this entire case, including the audio recordings and the forensic financial report, to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation for criminal prosecution on multiple felony charges, including grand larceny, fraud, and elder exploitation. Conviction on these charges carries a sentence of up to 15 years in state prison. He slammed the gavel again. Case closed. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic buzz of whispers and movement. Clara was screaming now, a torrent of incoherent rage and despair. Mark was still slumped over, looking like a broken man. Harrison was hastily stuffing papers into his briefcase, his face grim with the totality of his defeat. David leaned over and hugged me. We did it, Eleanor. We won. We won everything. Sophie threw her arms around my neck, and the three of us stood there for a moment, a tiny island of tearful relief in a sea of chaos. We had won, but it was a victory born of unimaginable pain. As court officers moved toward her table, Clara broke away from them and made one last, desperate rush toward me. David and a bailiff stepped in her path, but she yelled over their shoulders, her face a grotesque mask of fury. I hate you! You've destroyed my life. You took my daughter and you turned her against me." "I didn't take her from you, Clara," I said, my voice clear and strong, easily carrying across the space between us. "You threw her away. You threw us both away the moment you decided that money was more important than love." "You are a selfish, wicked old woman," she screamed, as the bailiffs finally got a firm grip on her arms and began pulling her away. "I was your daughter. I deserved that house. It was my inheritance." Her shrieks echoed down the long marble hallway as they dragged her out of the courtroom, and then they were gone. The daughter I had raised, the woman who had come from my own body, had been erased by a monster of her own making. 3 days later, Sophie and I sat in David's car, parked across the street from my house. My house. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway. We watched in silence as 2 men carried out boxes and furniture, the remnants of the life Clara and Mark had tried to build on the foundation of their lies. David stood on the porch, a clipboard in his hand, making sure they took only what was legally theirs. "Do you want to talk to her?" Sophie asked softly, her voice filled with a sad maturity. "One last time?" I shook my head. There's nothing left to say. When the truck was finally loaded, Clara walked down the driveway toward our car. David moved to intercept her, but I lowered the window an inch. I needed to see her face one last time. "Mom," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow defeat. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked into her eyes, searching for a flicker of genuine remorse, for any sign that she understood the depth of the wound she had inflicted. But I saw nothing. I saw a woman who was sorry she had been caught. I saw a woman who was sorry she was facing prison. I saw a woman who was sorry she had lost. I simply looked at her, then raised the window, cutting off her last, desperate plea. The moving truck rumbled to life, and Clara's car followed it down the street. And just like that, after 2 years of torment, they were gone from my life. David walked over and handed me the keys. "It's all yours again, Eleanor. Welcome home." Walking through my own front door was one of the strangest experiences of my life. The house was mine, but it didn't feel like it. It smelled of Clara's perfume. The furniture was arranged her way. It felt haunted by their presence, tainted by their greed. "It doesn't feel right," I whispered to Sophie, who was standing beside me in the foyer. She looked around the living room, her expression grim. "We'll make it right again, Grandma," she said, taking my hand. "We'll chase out all the ghosts." And that's what we did. The next few months were a whirlwind of reclaiming and rebuilding. We opened every window to air the place out. We hired a company to deep clean every room. We donated the expensive, tasteless furniture Clara had bought with my money to a women's shelter. We painted the walls, returning them to the warm, cheerful colors Arthur and I had chosen so long ago. Slowly, painstakingly, we brought the soul back into the house. We made it a home again. 6 months after the trial, we got an update from David. The district attorney had indeed pressed criminal charges. Clara and Mark, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, had been unable to repay more than a fraction of the money they'd stolen. What little assets they had were seized, but it barely made a dent. They had lived lavishly, spending the money as fast as they stole it. I had my house back, but the rest was gone forever. And I found to my surprise that I didn't care. Money was just paper. I had gotten my life back. I had my granddaughter. I was richer than I had ever been. One afternoon, a letter arrived. The return address was the county jail. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. I held the thin envelope in my hand for a long time, just staring at it. "It's from her, isn't it?" Sophie asked, coming into the kitchen. I nodded. "Are you going to read it?" "I don't know if I can." "You should," she said gently. "Whatever it says, it's just words on paper now. She can't hurt you anymore." I took a deep breath, slid open the envelope, and unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Mom," it began. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, not even for you to read this. But I have to try. Mark and I took a plea deal. They gave me 3 years and Mark got 4. I sit in this cell every day and I think about what I did. I threw away everything for nothing. We were in so much debt. Mark's business failed, and we were losing everything. We were scared. We saw your house, your money, and we saw an easy way out. It started as a terrible idea, and it just grew into this monster that consumed us both. That's not an excuse. It's just the ugly truth. I betrayed you. I betrayed Sophie. I betrayed Dad's memory. I am so sorry. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I just wanted you to know that. Love, Clara. I slowly folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Tears were streaming down my face, not tears of forgiveness, but tears of grief for the daughter I had lost so long ago. What did she say? Sophie asked. She said she's sorry, I replied, my voice thick. She said they were desperate. Do you believe her? I thought for a long moment. I believe she's sorry she's in prison, I said honestly. Whether she's truly sorry for what she did to me, I don't know, and I don't think it matters anymore. Are you going to write back? No, I said, placing the letter in a drawer. Not now. Maybe not ever. My future isn't about her anymore. It's about us. Life began to find a new, peaceful rhythm. The seasons changed. A year passed, then 2. Sophie enrolled in the state university, majoring in social work. I want to help people like you, she told me. I want to be the person who fights for grandparents who don't have a Sophie to fight for them. I had never been prouder. My own life returned to me. Betty and I resumed our weekly tea times. I rejoined my bridge club. I started volunteering at the local library. The fear that had been my constant companion for 2 years finally faded away, replaced by a quiet contentment. The house was filled with the smell of baking bread and the sound of Sophie's laughter when she came home on weekends. It was a home again. The criminal trial came and went. As she'd written, Clara was sentenced to 3 years in a state penitentiary, and Mark to 4. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, had finally been served. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the attic and came across an old photo album. I opened it to see pictures of Clara as a little girl, a smiling, gap-toothed child on a swing set, a proud 5-year-old on her first day of school. I sat on the dusty floor and cried for that little girl, for the woman she should have become, for the love that had been corrupted by greed. "You okay, Grandma?" Sophie asked, finding me there. "I'm saying goodbye," I whispered, closing the album. "To the daughter I used to have, the woman she became. I said goodbye to her a long time ago." I put the album away. I closed the box. I left the ghosts in the attic and went back downstairs to the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. A life with my wonderful granddaughter, with my dear friend Betty, with the peace I had earned. And that's where my story ends. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, peaceful evening. I'm sitting here now, on my own porch, in my own home, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. Sophie is inside, making us dinner. The air is warm. The roses Arthur and I planted are in full bloom, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel completely at peace. It just goes to show you that even in the darkest of times, courage can bring the truth to light. I share a new story like this every single day, so if you don't want to miss what happens next in our little world, be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell. And if you want to hear another story that will leave you absolutely speechless, just click on one of the videos you see on the screen now. I promise you won't be disappointed.